All right. So thank you all for joining us today to speak about what we've entitled the power of peer support. I do believe that it is very powerful to connect with other people who have similar experiences as us, especially when we're offering support to other people. So thank you all for joining us today. And I'd just like to invite each of you to introduce yourselves and introduce and what the work is that you do and some of the main ways that you support parents in your work. Maybe Veronica, if you want to take a go at that first, you can go ahead.
All right, I'll go ahead. So my name's Veronica Merryfield, pronouns are she, her. I live in Cape Breton. I founded the Cape Breton Transgender Network a little while ago, but I've been advocating and supporting in the trans community for pretty much close to 30 years now, in the various places I've lived. So here, all of the work I do in the trans space is volunteer effort. All of the advocacy work I do is volunteer. I do a lot of work with various levels of government for affecting change. I work with individuals in terms of support and whatever they need, and I do a fair bit with families and youth. Same thing, most of it's one-on-one.
Okay, thank you. BriAnna, you want to introduce yourself and some of the work that you do?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a clinical social worker. I have a private practice on the South Shore. How I kind of got into this space more so is through my own personal experience. I have a child who is almost 9, but expressed that she was a trans girl when she was around 4. So at the time, I mean, I certainly had some knowledge, but I wasn't involved in the capacity that I am now then. And it was super important for me to find that connection. So I can relate to parents who are kind of in that space of like, they're at the beginning stages of it. They don't know where to go, who to reach out to, or where to get those resources. At the time, I was kind of in between the South Shore and the Valley. So I did, a Google search online to see if there was any kind of groups or anything around. And at the time, what I came across was PFLAG. And there was 2 that were showing as being kind of existing, I guess, or functioning. And that was PFLAG Halifax and PFLAG in Truro. And that's how I actually got connected with Rosita and Cynthia Sweeney, who isn't here tonight, but she and I do a lot of work together as well. So I essentially went to one of the groups that they had running. I think they were running at the time monthly. Rosita, you can probably speak to the frequency of that. And it was interesting and good because I was, my child was only 4 at the time. I believe everybody at the group at the time when I went all had teenagers. So for me, it was kind of this new space of just experiencing and connecting with parents who had children who are identifying as gender diverse or trans. And it was good because they kind of already had the experience of going through some things and being able to kind of foretell almost in a way of things for me to consider. And so it's huge to make that connection with peer support. So after that, because I couldn't find anything rural or local to where I was, Cynthia Sweeney and I talked about starting a group on the South Shore. So at the time my private practice was based out of Chester pre-pandemic, and I had an office space there. So we started a parent group, monthly meetup group. And I think when we first started out, we had maybe like 3 or 4, and it wasn't just parents. We had grandparents that showed up sometimes. And I think probably the largest we had at the time was around 6. And it wasn't like we were advertising through like my Facebook page, connections. So it wasn't really super expansive as far as how to get that reach out there. Following that, both Cynthia and I joined Lunenburg Pride as well. So we joined the board with Lunenburg Pride, which was helpful to get word out even more for people who are connected with the community. And so that's another resource and support. There's a lot of local Pride organizations. So if anybody's looking for a place to start, that may be a good start, because they often have awareness of what's being offered as far as support elsewhere, or even any kind of activities and stuff. So that's kind of how things got started, was through my own personal experience, but also awareness that in rural communities, there wasn't much for resources and supports at the time for parents, especially with that age group. There still were a lot of parents that were coming with teenagers, but then there was kind of the occasional with a young child as well. But over the years, so again, kind of like pre-pandemic, we started to host like picnics, like outdoor picnics and stuff. And we did that a little bit during, to the degree that we could, because we found that was a way to open it up to not just supporting the parents, but also allowing the kids to connect with other kids and like normalize that experience with families coming. So we did that as well. We did it probably less frequent, and it was like every couple months. So that's another thing that once the weather starts getting nicer again, to kind of keep an eye out for. I personally myself, I run them on the South Shore, but because there's not a lot for younger children who identify as gender diverse, there was people even coming from like the Halifax area up to this or down to the South Shore, just to make that connection for their kids, because that was the biggest thing, was just having that peer support for them as well. So that's kind of the main thing that I do as far as like more of that community connection. But I'm also a WPATH trained clinician, so I get a lot of referrals for either from the community, like from parents, and also from community supports and resources like child and adolescent mental health services. Sometimes Department of Community Services would make referrals for youth or even children who are looking for hormone readiness assessments, to get referrals in connection with the pediatric endocrinologist, Dr. Makashi, who works with children and families. So that's something that I've been doing a lot of work with, just to get that support and resource for. It's not even just there's no like specific time frame, but certainly the sooner people can make that connection and start getting those resources in place, the better. And then also doing readiness letters for hormone and or surgery for adults as well. And then just in general, providing that support and therapeutic work for children and families, not just who identify as gender diverse, but just anybody and anything that families experience and go through. So that's what I do.
I'm glad that we have you on here today, BriAnna. This is a lot. Can you just quickly, in case anybody doesn't know what PFLAG is, can you just let folks know what that stands for?
Yeah, it's a group for parents specifically, but it's not specific to trans and gender diversity. It's like LGBTQ, 2SIA. So Rosita can probably speak to more of like the group that was running when she was co-facilitating with Cynthia Sweeney. Cynthia is still kind of the person that is, I think, overseeing or kind of leading the PFLAG Halifax chapter specifically. I do know there's an active one in Truro as well. I don't know, Veronica, you may be able to speak to if there's an active PFLAG in Cape Breton area. But yeah, so it's support for parents specifically, but there's also lots of resources as well.
Okay, thank you. And Rosita, do you want to do a little introduction of yourself and your work and how ways that you support parents as well? Thanks.
My journey is similar to BriAnna. Started about 8 years ago, 9 years ago, maybe, when my daughter came out as trans. She's one of a twin, was born male, transitioned to female, and I was in the school system, but I really truly didn't know what that was all about and what that meant to her. So my journey started with her along the way, and from there, when you start to discover as a parent that there's not a lot of information out there, not a lot of support, you start making connections. And I recognized that in the school piece of it, I had, in an elementary school, I had children who were identifying as on that gender spectrum, non-binary, from one end to the other, and not having what do we do with this? There's just unseen of and unheard in that one particular, especially in elementary. We hear a lot of they're too young to know what they're talking about, and BriAnna can really speak to that piece for sure. So I thought, okay, so how do I do this? I need to talk to the parents because the kids are afraid to tell their parents. So I started a parent group, and ran into Cynthia Sweeney, and who was another parent. We started in the library in Lower Sackville, and we've been doing that, I'd say, for 6 years now, once a month through the school year. And the IWK Trans Health team is aware of that, which is where we received our WPATH training from Dr. Suzink and Dr. Makashi and those folks. And they kind of advertise that, and we try and advertise it that we're there. It is just for parents and caregivers, like grandparents who do show up. It's a safe, we wanted to create a safe space for us as parents to be able to speak about things that we couldn't speak about with our kids that might seem invalidating, but our own concerns. And also, where do I go next? And like BriAnna said, we'd have parents who'd have really young kids all the way up through to adults. But what always came out of it was someone was able to connect with someone who had a similar age child, or someone was able to connect with someone who'd gone through something that was quite devastating or concerning, or I can't get in contact with this person, how can I do that? And we were fortunate enough to have one of the social workers on the Trans Health team attend our parent meetings, who was a great advocator for folks who came on and said, listen, I'm scared, as I'll do it. And we got these connections made and made a difference. But part of a huge piece of my practice is working with youth, but I'm compelled to take their lived experiences that are shared with me and use that with their permission, anonymously, of course, as an education piece for administrators, and build awareness in our schools for what that lived experience is, because we have this policy up here, which, by the way, is being revamped. The transgender and gender diverse document is being revamped being updated, I should say, and I'm fortunate enough to have a voice with that. But the policy is what it is, and I've made it very clear that the policy's up here, but boots on the ground, the changes aren't happening, particularly for this marginalized group. And that is a huge passion of mine, and I support the youth that I work with and the parents that I work with in my private practice by helping them navigate at the school level, knowing what the inclusion policy is and what that's supposed to look like. So anything and everything that has anything to do that spills over into the community. I wear my I am a proud parent badge quite openly, just to put that boundary down that I'm a supporter, but also I find that it helps maybe in the middle of some uncomfortable conversation sometimes. Don't get me wrong, I don't have a problem with having an uncomfortable conversation, but just the support piece needs to be visible, and our gender diverse population, who I pointed out at the beginning of this, there's 1 in 12. There's more per capita in Nova Scotia than there is across the country who identify along that spectrum. So these are our kids in school. These are the people who work at our supermarket. These are the people that you might sit in church next to, or wherever you go at any given moment. It's here, it's prevalent. So we need to make sure that we're doing the work to see themselves represented no matter where they go. And I wanted to go back and say that BriAnna, a little plug for BriAnna and Cindy, that they wrote a book called The Pink Balloon. And I don't know if anybody's heard of it, but it's phenomenal. I don't want to speak to it. I think it would be great if BriAnna could speak a little bit to that, because it was quite impressive.
Okay. Do you feel like do you want to share a bit about that book, BriAnna?
Sure, yeah. So Cynthia and I did become quite close once we made the connection and started collaboratively working together to do some of these groups. And Cynthia is the owner and facilitator of Simply Good Form, and it's an educational and advocacy little corporation that is also trying to expand, get knowledge and education out there. So we work alongside each other, and we were just chatting one time when we were connecting around some business stuff and talking about our experiences. And so I shared my experience in more detail with Cynthia, and she just felt very moved by it. Her child wasn't as young as mine. And so she just felt as though that was a story that really needed to be out there, and to be to just help kind of give some awareness and connection for people, and also some resources, and just to start having the conversation. Because like Veronica had mentioned earlier, before we kind of had everybody come on, if you're going to see gender diversity, you're going to see it around those early formative years of between 4 and 6, when identity is really starting to form. And the thing is that a lot of people that are kind of haven't experienced it or are outside of it and don't have an understanding, think that it's connected to sexuality, and it's not. And so they think, well, somebody can't possibly know or wouldn't express it until later in life, but it's actually the early ages, and that's where we need to start getting the information out more in the schools, in any kind of family resources and services, so that people do have those connection and resources early on. So that was the hope of the book, was to be able to help share some of that information, share some of that sense of community and connection, and helping to normalize it too. There's a lot of families that they're approaching their schools for the first time to say, I need support for my child. How do I even start? How are you going to support my child? And sometimes the schools don't have the knowledge and information. So it is a good way to kind of get it out there in a very child friendly way for parents to understand, for them to be able to explain to, not even just for their own family and kids, but even for friends and family members and other people who maybe just don't have the sense of knowledge around it to start. And we have in the back of it too some definitions and stuff, just to help kind of explain terminology and different things. And the lovely thing is there's inclusive reading weeks that are happening across the province. I believe Cynthia actually kind of got that on the go, and it's been happening every year. And so some of the schools are using The Pink Balloon and other books to even read to some of the classes as well, just to, again, promote diversity and the support of that within schools. So yeah, it's been a little project that Cynthia and I had on the go. I'm co-author of it. Cynthia is the author, and I believe just over March break, Cynthia did a reading of it not too long ago, and we've done some at the libraries as well. So
nice.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And I saw that Shauna put a link in the chat to the book as well. And we will have a link as well on the Making Connections page, as well as a few other books that are kind of geared towards kids and those kind of early learning times for family as well. Veronica, I wanted to circle back to you around, you're in Cape Breton. So you are living the rural life.
I am.
And
Yeah.
Yeah.
And somebody asked earlier if there was a P flag in Cape Breton. Apparently there is, but I've never seen it being active. So I've
Okay.
reached out to see whether it is.
Mm.
And I was going to pick up on was it BriAnna was talking about, and what I was talking about earlier before we started, about that gender identity appearing quite early. And this is why education is so important, particularly to give that kind of visibility element to young kids, because if they don't know what it is, they're going to find themselves stuck. And this is one of the things that happens with a lot of children, is they don't understand at that young age what's happening, and they don't have anyone to reach out to. And if their parents aren't educated, they won't necessarily know what to do either. And I find in the kind of work that I do that there's this mix of, you know, parents that are terribly supportive and parents that are terribly hostile. And unfortunately, I tend to spend a lot of my support time with the children and youth who have hostile parents. And I'm quite happy to engage with hostile parents, because I think once they get to speak to somebody with lived experience, it makes a big difference to their understanding. But, you know, there's a lot of hostility there. But yeah, children know. And you talk to any trans adults, and they've known since they were young. And as the education has got better in society and society's got more open, I'm seeing more older adults coming out, and you hear the stories about how they were young when they knew, and they just didn't know what to do with it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, Rosita, there is a youth project in Cape Breton that's active, and I do some work with them too.
And I believe that they have a parent support group as well.
They do.
At the Cape Breton Youth Project.
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah.
They do. Yeah, there's all sorts of stuff that happens around here. But being a rural community, it's harder sometimes for parents to come together to kind of meet and do that kind of stuff. But the other thing that I find with a lot of parents is they need a level of understanding, or they want to ask questions from somebody that knows, to help their child, but they don't want their child to do the education for them.
Yes.
So that's where they end up coming to me to ask me questions from my experience, so they can best help their child. And I think that's terribly valuable. And and being older, I think they probably relate to me rather than trying to ask somebody in their sort of teens or 20s.
Yeah, that's very valuable. Absolutely.
It is. And I'm starting to be asked so as well as that, my kind of day job is, one of my day jobs is doing equity, diversity and inclusion training. I'm getting asked to do more and more for senior groups. The seniors try to navigate the world for their grandkids, and that's a lot of learning that they have to go through. But they're one of the most accepting groups that I teach, and it's usually quite a lot of fun too. Yeah, they just want to do the right thing for their grandkids, which is beautiful to see.
Absolutely. And that openness to learning, right? Like the kids are kind of getting their grandparents open to learning and learning some new information.
Right. So if you're looking at the kind of in general terms, and I know this is massive generalization, but the kids and the grandparents are much more open usually than the parents, which is quite interesting to see how that plays out in family dynamics.
That is very interesting.
Yeah.
I'm curious, and maybe I'll let you start with this one, Veronica, is just what are some of the main, you all work with parents. Are you able to kind of identify some of the kind of most common, like maybe one of the most kind of common questions or common concerns that parents are coming to you with when they first reach out?
I think I probably end up dealing with the questions that they can't find answers from anywhere else.
Okay.
So I get all the strange esoteric questions. The questions that they're too embarrassed to ask somebody else, which I
Right.
make a big point about when I teach EDI and when I work with people. It's kind of like, you can ask me anything you like, anything you need the answer to, and it doesn't matter how weird or strange it might be. I'll give it a go. And that turns out to be really valuable, because that's the kind of questions that they want answered, but they don't know how to or where to go ask them. And they're all over the map, so I can't give you, what's common or what isn't, but sometimes they're kind of interesting.
Yeah. Well, and I imagine as well, when you're working with members of older generations, a lot of us get a lot of our learning from the internet. And what I've noticed, especially in rural communities and older generations, is that people want to talk to people. You want to have a one-on-one conversation.
I want to have a one-on-one.
Yeah, to have someone to talk to.
So I mean, I get asked everything from how do I inject their hormones, to what do I do with, why am I seeing certain behaviors from my child, and it's kind of like, well, I can pinpoint that piece and that piece, and this is how it's interacting, and it's kind of, oh, light bulb moment, and then they can make the changes that make it work. But it's also a fair amount of how to navigate the system, because it's not an easy system to navigate. And they want to know who they should call and how that should work, and what pieces they need to put in place to advance or do what they need to do.
Right.
It's not an easy system to navigate, and the decentralization of so many resources makes it very difficult for them. And then on top of that, it's just questions about things like medications or hormones or what's going on or what to expect, those kind of things, that
Right.
kind of general growing up stuff.
Yeah, of course. And they're reaching you through the Cape Breton Transgender Network, is that correct?
They reach me in all sorts of different ways.
Okay. Right.
So I put the Cape Breton Transgender Network into place to give visibility to what I was already doing, because
Gotcha.
I was being reached from all sorts of other places. So I knew people are around looking for something,
Right.
but they weren't able to find it. Now they find me fairly routinely when they need to. But
Okay.
I mean, I also do a lot of these kind of things, speaking events and what have you, or EDI stuffs in companies, and people reach out to me from those, or they, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. Shauna, do you have a few things that you'd like to, do you want to step into some questions? I have more if you don't. I just want to make sure to give you an opportunity.
Oh, thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, I was just putting in Veronica's website there for the Cape Breton Transgender Network, so you caught me off guard.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay though. And so I'm curious, and thinking about BriAnna, what you were saying too about how the identity, how at that age of between 4 and 6, how it's children are beginning to understand their identity, and and you picked up on it, and you, I guess, validated it, I guess, is a way of, I'm thinking of expressing that. And I'm thinking of the parents who maybe missed it, or they ignored it, or they didn't understand it, and what has been everyone's experience kind of when parents, like when you have that time, like I'm thinking as a 4 or 6 year old, you're feeling this, you've tried to express it the best as you can at 4 and 6, and it wasn't received and it wasn't validated, and then you're growing up and you're in those elementary years, and then I'm just like wondering what that's like come at junior high, and there's just no denying, right? And how do parents kind of reconcile that time when they weren't aware or they weren't understanding, and now what that journey looks like, and how maybe they kind of help rebuild relationships, that if it went kind of sideways, if there was started to be distrust or anger or frustration in the relationship. My kids are 10 and 11, and I make mistakes all the time with them. And just being like mindful of how parenting itself is not an easy task, and we mess up all the time. And then when you've got this extra dynamic in it that, I'm wondering what your guys' experience is around helping parents navigate through that, and your own experience navigating that.
One thing I was going to mention, piggybacking on some of what Veronica was saying, and it ties into what you're saying too, is kids are very intuitive. I do work with children as young as 2 and all the way up until adults. And to be quite honest, children are more intuitive and self-aware because of their openness. They don't have those guards or those barriers that we create as adults to be able to express themselves. So they will generally kind of pick up on whether an environment's safe or not safe to be able to express something. And that leads into the importance, parents may not always be the first point of contact. And it may not be that the parent really is doing anything wrong. If somebody doesn't know, they're not going to necessarily be sharing information that doesn't fit or feel like it's in context with their family dynamics. So just for anybody who's on here, who's like a counselor, school counselor, or working within the school systems, or even, family resource centers or anything within the community, the more visibility there is and the more, awareness, or even people who are, have pins on or are participating in pride events or weeks that are advocating for this stuff, that is where kids are going to find those safe places that they're going to feel like they can come out for the first time. So there is a lot of kind of brief experiences that some parents might feel if their child doesn't come out until later on. And so when, like you were mentioning, later on, if it comes, it may come and coincide with when they're starting to explore sexuality. There may be kind of both things happening at once then, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's connected to that, because it definitely happens earlier on. So when parents are kind of experience this grief of like, how didn't I know? Or they start reflecting on, I remember a time when I said this, maybe that was what contributed to them not being able to. The best they can do is like right now, where they're in it right now. Like once you get that solid, understanding, maybe the kids are learning from somebody else that they know that came out, and then they're realizing that's actually very much like my experience. And now they finally have the words and the context for explaining it. I've experienced a lot of youth that have explained that to me, where they've said, I've known, like I've known since I was 8 years old. I've known since I was 6 years old, but I didn't even know how to explain it. So it may not be that the parents have done anything. It may just be a natural developmental process of putting the pieces together and figuring things out. And so for parents who are kind of in this space now of, okay, I have the information, I'm ready to kind of take action or do what I need to support, they can have those conversations with their child and say, ask them, like, do you feel like you experienced anything when you were younger or you knew? And they can share their own kind of feelings of maybe even being scared or not knowing or not having the information. That's being human. And it's also showing our kids too that, like, we're not perfect. We don't have all the answers, but we're ready to go forward and do what we need to do now. And I've actually worked with parents. I've been contacted a couple times now from Department of Community Services who have had children who are not being supported by their parents, and it's creating some emotional harm for them and struggles. And so I've connected with parents who are kind of in that either denial stage or they've been raised a certain way and have certain beliefs, and they're just really struggling with moving out of that. And these parents aren't doing it, and they're not generally coming from a place of like wanting to cause harm. It is coming from a place of fear and lack of knowledge. So as long as there's an openness and a willingness to learn, that's the best that parents can do. And then connecting and getting your own support, because it isn't just because your child expresses that, that automatically you're going to know what to do, even with your own feelings. So that's why it's really important to make these connections with other parents or other community resources that really can help share that and help people navigate that.
Thanks, BriAnna. Rosita, Veronica, do you want to weigh in on that, of what your experiences have been like with parents who are trying to navigate that?
Sure.
Yeah.
One of the, just to piggyback on BriAnna, is the grief piece would often come out in our parent groups. And it wasn't that part of the grief piece, but the grief piece where I've known them as Janelle for 10 years, and now they're John, and I feel like I've lost my son. And it was a safe space for us to be able to say that that's okay. It's okay for parents. That's normal. You're not a bad parent because you're having those feelings, because it is an adjustment for you, and it's a safe space to acknowledge that. And we've all dealt with that as a parent in one form or another. How big it was for each of us depends on your situation and what you were aware of from the get-go. Or some parents may have seen things from the get-go. I've worked with parents who've seen things from a very early age, and I've worked with parents who said, I didn't have a clue, I was sideswiped, and everywhere and anything in between, an opportunity to be able to process that. Number one, and know you're not alone. Number two, the connection piece. I need to feel connected to someone who knows what it is that we're going through. The other connected piece that needed to come in is just like Veronica said, how do I navigate this huge system with all this backlog in order to access the supports for my child? And is being aware of that there's a youth project and who that supports, is being aware of there's a PFLAG and who that supports. But it's also being aware that at 4, 5, 6 years old, that I still have somewhere to go, and that I'm not alone, and that too is as prevalent as our older youth. One of the very first things that I did give all of my parents, whether I work with them in private practice, and I don't know, Lindsay, if you had the chance to see it or not, as I forward it to you, it's called the FAP, the Family Acceptance Project. And it's an incredible document that kind of details for parents some do's and don'ts, things that you might be able to answer some questions. And yes, there's some disturbing things in there about the facts about suicide ideation, attempts for suicide, but it's also important to have that information for yourself, because we also have parents that come to us where there's one parent who is in support and there's another parent who isn't. And we always start with the education piece, right? They're coming from a place of fear, lack of awareness, and hope. Our goal is to hopefully educate and bring awareness to what this lived experience is like for your child, to have empathy for that. And at the end of the day, unconditional love for your child. Your child is your child is your child. Doesn't matter. That has nothing to do with gender. Their personality has nothing to do with gender. And we come from a place of we have to forgive ourselves when we do make mistakes, because we will make mistakes. But when our underlying purpose and soul intention is to love and support our child, that gives us a lot of leeway to be able to restore the mistakes that we make along the way. And I, for one, can raise my hand and say I was probably a little too much of an advocate at the beginning, because I was going, oh, I'm going to be there and I'm going to support my daughter. And the mama horns came out, just making sure that no one said or did anything to hurt her, which I still would advocate for. But she kind of said to me, Mom, you need to tone down a little bit. I just want to be known as Christine. I know I love you, blah, blah, blah. I said, too much, huh? She said, yes. And every particular journey of every single gender diverse person is different. No one has, it's not a cookie cutter situation. And I think if we can focus on how we're the same instead of how we're different, we create empathy. And it's very important for parents and anyone else to know that gender and sexuality are two entirely different things, which is one of the barriers that seems to be in place for accepting our kids at an early age. And I've even come to a place as an educator who works in the school. They talk about GSAs, and I figure that we need to come up with a new name for GSAs, because that speaks to sexuality only. You know, I'm either gay or I'm straight, and we need to have an alliance here, something like a rainbow club where we're all welcome. It doesn't matter what color you are, who you are, but if you need a safe space to come with some folks who you feel that, you know, are going to get who you are, then that's the place to be. Like, it's just having that awareness as we move forward that, I never looked at it that way before. I never looked at it that way before. And when we came together as parents to have these conversations, express our worries, our fears, our barriers, most of us walk away with feeling grateful that we're not alone, but also with some information and another way to connect moving forward. I work a lot with helping parents navigate the school system to make sure that they're feeling safe at school. And that's because I've been in the school system for 25 years. And I feel that in order to treat the whole piece of being transgender and what that looks like in a family, that doesn't just stop and start with what happens in that house. It starts it also with, do I feel safe when I go out in the community? Do I feel safe when I'm at? And I have to tell you, I find, I don't know about parents or whatever roles are on here, I'm pleasantly surprised that it's our youth that are the most accepting. It's our youth and our students that are the most accepting of our kids in the school system or in the community. They don't look twice. And if you take a little, if you take a moment to build some awareness, and as you look around and you notice that someone's different, it's the adults that we need to really work with to overcome some of these barriers for our youth so that they feel accepted, you know, moving forward. That old mentality, that binary system.
I see Jason has a question too, but I want to pick up on something you said, Rosita, around, I'm curious about, as a parent, like your child's story is their story. And it's not for me as a parent to share that story or force people to be coming out or anything like that. And I also would feel a pressure, to advocate. And when I see some, injustice or wrongdoing on my child that I feel is connected to their identity, does that come up with your guys' work with parents and how they balance that? I'm thinking, like, you want your child to have their voice and it's their story, but then, that urge to fight for them as well. Like how do you manage that? And what does that look like with the parents that you guys have worked with?
I think for the most part, and correct me if I'm wrong, Veronica and BriAnna, is that we're learning to take our cues from our kids and our youth, and they're going to be the first person who's going to tell us if they're feeling safe or not. Yeah. For example, I was with, just as an example, I was with my daughter just before she was moving up to northern New Brunswick. She's a paramedic, and this was going to be our first segue. Well, there was a lot of things inside my head. It's like, I hope, she's going to be safe and she's going to be okay. And she was just getting her phone transferred into her own name. And the gentleman who was doing it referred to her as a he, and I corrected him. It's her, right? It just was automatic for me. I corrected her. And so a few minutes later, he did the same thing again. And I corrected again. So when we were done, I left it alone. And as we walked away, I said to my daughter, I said, Christine, did that bother you? Did that bother you? Not really. We're never going to see that person again. I couldn't give a shit what they think of me. So for her to be in that place, that's great. That's great. That made me happy. But I also made me realize that, sometimes I need to take a step back and take a cue from her. And our kids, no matter how age, our kids are going to come home from school and they're going to tell us what went right and what went wrong. And we're learning that more and more schools and more kids going in are the educators in the building are making them feel safe. They're working with them. But it's navigating that piece about what other kids say, and the neighbors that were once your friends who are no longer your friends. Those are some of the tough things that we try and work with together as parents when we're together, because now you have 2 6-year-olds who are both males, and now one's female and the other one's male. We got sleepovers. How are we going to navigate that? How are we going to help our child understand that that parent no longer wants you to hang with that child? Like, those are some of the most heart-wrenching things that come out of the parent group. And we laugh about it, we talk about it, we share it, and we might not have the answer, but we had the opportunity to share our worries, share our concerns, and respect and validate, which goes a long way towards, you know, that next step forward. And let's just face it, we're not always going to have someone who's going to be understanding and accepting. Is the resilience that we try and build within our youth and our kids, create that safe space, but also help them understand that this is your human right, this is who you are, and be proud of it, and don't let anyone else take that from you. We've got a long way to go, but we're getting there.
Yeah. I've got a few points that I've
Yeah.
made notes on the last couple of bits. So, I advocate for letting the children make the steer. And if in doubt, ask them. Don't ever assume. And you'll be surprised at what they come back with. Those little nuggets of wisdom about, like your girl at the, you're never going to see them again. What's the point? And you wouldn't have thought of that, but she did. And those are really important pieces to pick up from your child to take as that steer. I'm really encouraged. You mentioned about kids in schools and how their peers are kind of it just is, and they're great with it, and they're dead proud of their schoolmates. Those kind of things are really, really important and fill me with hope, because these are going to be the adults in 20 years who are going to be making policy and working in places and selling this kind of stuff. And it's just normal for them. And this is just perfect going forward. But that kind of level of acceptance that doesn't even need the word acceptance, it just is in schools, is phenomenal. Somebody mentioned the journey being, everybody's journey being different, and the journeys really are very, very different. And it's one of the bugbears that I have about the medical system, because it doesn't always accept that those journeys are going to be different. It forces a particular path. So a lot of the advocacy work I have to do is about bringing together an individual's journey and the path that the medical system enforces, and how they can navigate around that to take the journey the way that they want to take that journey, but still get what they need out of the health system. So take that back to wherever. But the thing about guilt and grief, I've lost count of the number of parents that I've had that I've counselled because they're going through guilt and grief over things, over what they missed, over what did they do wrong, over how come they didn't notice. And one of the things I've been doing in recent years is, as they get over the emotional part, is to ask them to give me a list of all the things that they see now that they missed, because this could be helpful to parents in the future. And I'm kind of gathering that list. It's quite an interesting one, but it helps them think and know that this kind of stuff can be useful in the future. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this list, but it's really quite eye-opening in that kind of hindsight perspective of the things that they realized that they did miss, and they remember it. They remember all of it.
Hmm.
Okay. New
I
piece of paper
really
for my
like
next
that.
note.
I might steal that one, Veronica.
Which one?
Well, all of the above, but the one with making the list, because we as humans tend to be really hard on ourselves, and guilt is such a useless emotion.
Oh,
It
hugely.
changes nothing. It changes nothing. It's just acknowledging, hey, I know better now, I'll do better. Isn't that what Maya Angelou said? We know better, we do better.
But then
And
our society has so much that has been driven by guilt, or guilt has been used to drive, and trying to unravel that for people to show that it's actually false guilt, and to move away from that is helpful too.
Yeah, thank you all for that. And like I love that kind of guided reflection to, and support people to take a look back, and how that could be helpful for parents going through it when they are going through it. I could see that being really useful as well, and validating for parents to look back on, right? Rosita, I feel aware of time. I know that you have to step away, and you're welcome not to, but I just want to make sure that if you need to step away, that you are welcome to do that.
I do have to run. I'm going to put my email here in the chat.
Perfect.
I have BriAnna's contact information, but I'm always open to any parent who has any question. And I'm not sure who's on here who is a parent or who's a representative or an ally. I just want to say that anybody who comes to this table like we do now, you're a supporter. And this is the domino effect that we need to happen. I didn't even know that it was just quite by accident when Cindy asked me to chip in here, and I didn't even know that this was a thing. And I'm pretty much, touching base with just about everyone that I can that has anything to do with this. So I learned something new myself. I'm grateful for that. But I'm also grateful for the folks that came here tonight to support, to advocate, to listen, and to maybe take away something that's going to make them feel I'm on the right track, or I know where I need to go, or I need to do this now. I have something from this tonight. Thanks for the opportunity for me to have a voice. And Veronica, I will be reaching out to you, and I'm going to put my email in here before I go. It's rositamcorbett@gmail.com.
Perfect. Thanks so much for sharing that, Rosita. And if you do have any resources that might be helpful for people navigating school systems, or like what the policies are, or anything like that, that you'd like to, feel free to send them to me on my email, and I'll make sure that they're on our Making Connections webpage. We are, as we're doing this, we are building a webpage of resources and information, so that parents are looking for information. The videos will be here, and as well as those resources that might be helpful for parents as they're supporting the folks they love to navigate this world. So
I just put there, the inclusion policy and supporting transgender in our schools. That's not the exact name, but you should be able to come up with that document. I can forward you the actual link.
Okay.
This is the one that's under reconstruction right now because it's a bit outdated. That one was 2014, so we're bringing it into the 2023. I will say though that I always start with the inclusion policy. I always start with the inclusion policy because it stipulates right there, and it's brief, it's short, it's to the point. And if you ever have a question or a concern with the schools, you go back to your inclusion policy. And one of the common concerns that still comes up from parents and youth is access to a safe bathroom. In my school, I'm an elementary school, we don't call it a gender neutral bathroom, we call it an everyone bathroom. That's part of normalizing it. We don't have gender neutral bathrooms in our house, so we call this one an everyone bathroom. Also, there's a variety of reasons why kids are afraid to go to the bathroom at school, and not all of them have anything to do with gender. So we didn't make a big deal about it. We're not asking permission, it's a human right, but we're having kids who need to get a key to access the bathroom. So why don't you just say, let me go up and say, hey, I'm gender diverse, or I don't fit in with everyone. Can you give me that key of shame so I can walk to the bathroom in front of everyone? Do you know what I mean? So those are some of the things that that's still an issue that we're working on. All right, I have the jet.
Thanks so much for jumping in and joining us today. Really appreciate it. And
It was
very
nice
to meet
meeting you. It was nice seeing you, BriAnna, and we'll see each other soon again, I'm sure.
Okay. Oh, and Sean has just put the link in there. So Veronica and BriAnna, one of the things I wanted to ask you both, as we've been doing this workshop, one of the questions or concerns that often comes up is from parents who are living maybe in small communities, living in towns where they have like generations of family, or, you know, have been there for a long time, and where things kind of, you sort of fit into a certain place and that's where you fit. And the challenge of advocating for, and sort of like just the challenge of navigating family members when you have a child who's you know, gender expansive, gender diverse, queer in some lovely way, but that maybe isn't understood by their community or their family. And I just would love to ask both of you your thoughts about best practices around that. Does it exist?
Oh, sorry, you can go ahead, Veronica.
I was going to say that I've not found a single answer to this. Family dynamics are so variable and so complicated, that it always comes down to what can I do to help somebody navigate various individuals. And there's always more at play than just the gender diversity that's going on. There's always something else. There's always a stack load of history. So I spend the time with people, and I download, I ask those questions, I get to understand all of these bits and pieces of that dynamic before I can really help them figure out how to make that go forward. And it takes a lot of time and effort to do that. It's not an easy thing to do, but in most cases it works, and I can give those simple little things that they can do as family to get the broader family to become supportive. Or if they're not going to become supportive, encourage them to not worry about that. There does come a point where if the family are not going to be supportive, you don't keep pushing them through that difficulty. It's not worth it for your children. It can be so destructive and damaging. You know, family doesn't mean it's the be all and end all. And if they're not going to be in that place, then don't worry about, you know, cutting ties while it works, because you've got to do the right thing for your child. Ultimately, they're the ones that, you know, could be affected badly enough that they're going to seek some other remedy. They could be the ones that are going to look at suicide. So no, in some cases it's not worth it.
So really prioritizing your child and their safety.
Yeah. I see that play out all too often in families. Yeah.
So go ahead.
I was going to say I've seen it in all of the different places I've lived. So
yeah, and the difference in people being willing and able to change pronouns can be pretty pronounced sometimes, especially in my own experience of family members or older family members, and trying to encourage folks to use they and them pronouns, if that's, you know, it can be a years long project sometimes.
It can be an awful lot of work, and you know, sometimes the family are honest about, you know, having difficulty with it, although, you know, to be honest, they would do it in other places for other things quite happily. But sometimes they just plain aren't. And, you know, do you really want to drive somebody through the repeated misgendering and everything that goes with that?
Right. Yeah. Thank you. BriAnna, do you have thoughts about?
Yeah, I can share a little bit about my experience. I mean, I know that I'm coming from a different place than some parents are, because I had some of the education and experience background prior to, but what I did was I kind of navigated resources first. And my family lives in another province, so it was kind of like more difficult but easier in some ways, because family wouldn't see us as often. So it's kind of like almost like this big coming out to everybody the first time you go back, when there's changes and differences that can be seen. So kind of going back to the other question too, of like following the lead of your child, like asking for their input. There may be some people in the family that they don't want to know just yet, or that they don't see enough, they don't want to kind of involve in that. So having those conversations about, you know, who are the core people, who do we want to start with, who do we feel is going to have a more difficult time, and maybe we need to like have more resources, or maybe we need to do it in a different way. Having those conversations is really important. I know for my child, like we asked of your friends, like, who do you want to tell? Who do you want to share it with? Or is there anybody that you don't want to? And then with family too, the approach that I took was kind of like a mass email. And the biggest thing is kind of as a family, and even for your child, is even if they're young, helping them to kind of understand or express like, what are our boundaries going to be? What are we willing to accept? What are we not willing to accept when it comes to that, you know, involvement and interaction? And for me, there was some hard no's, and there was some flexibility and understanding, because everybody, you know, needs to learn too, because they might not have exposure to it. So essentially what I did is I kind of compiled some thoughts and ideas from different resources that I had read about, you know, sharing this information with family and friends. And I created an email that essentially expressed, you know, as parents to our child, we've been experiencing and witnessing these changes, these differences that, you know, we weren't necessarily sure of, or we didn't know how to understand, but we've come to learn that this, and, you know, sharing how the child's identifying, sharing some resources and even some statistics about, you know, transgender and gender diverse children and youth, and the impact of not being supportive that it can have on them. And then expressing what our expectations were, you know, when you're around our child or around us, this is what we expect as far as, you know, whether it be pronouns or not saying certain things, like, you know, maybe certain topics of conversation you don't want brought up, or derogatory comments, or, you know, just things like that. And then that kind of ending piece of, here are some resources. Like, we understand that this is going to take some time. We understand that it's going to be easier for some than others. And if you want to learn more, if you want to be a part of this with us, here's some resources. And so that was kind of the approach. And with my experience, there was like a resounding amount of support. There was, you know, a couple people who were unsure or didn't really know where they stood with things. But it came down to, the bottom line is, if you can't be supportive of our child and this experience, you are not a safe person to be around our child. So we will be making decisions to cut certain people out of our lives if they can't be respectful. It's one thing to have a different opinion and a different approach, but you can still hold that belief and approach and still be respectful of a person, and still use their pronouns, and still be, you know, supportive in that you're not being derogatory in those moments, whether they're brief or long periods of time. But I found even the people that were kind of hesitant in the beginning, you know, as they started spending more time with our child and experiencing that, it started to click and make more sense. So for them, in their mind, to kind of process it. And so it's interesting, because there was a couple interviews, kind of interview, like Zoom things that Cynthia and I did during the pandemic, that was similar to this, like workshops or support kind of recordings and resources. And not that long ago, somebody from the States reached out to me just by email and said, you know, this is our experience. This is what we're going through with our young child. We don't know anybody else who has had a child in this age category, so we don't really know how to navigate it. And one of the things was, how do we navigate this with our family and friends? Like, and so essentially what I did for the first time was I went through my email that I sent and I cut out certain information and names and put kind of she, her, they in the pronoun section, so that it could essentially be like a draft version that they could edit themselves and then use. Because for parents who are like just coming into this but want to be extremely supportive, they may not know all the things that could be helpful to share with family to give that context and that information. So it just was kind of like a template for them to, you know, make their own, but at least they didn't have to start from scratch. So I don't necessarily have that where I want to like put it out there on the internet, because I feel like it's such a personal thing for people that if anybody wants that kind of support and help of like, how do I share it? If anybody wants kind of a template they can play around with or explore, I can certainly share that. All they need to do is just send me an email.
Yeah, thank you. It's really generous. And I can imagine how very helpful it would be. Shauna?
Thanks. As I know we're getting too close to the end of our time, and I have a really important question about a situation where, because you know, as a parent, you never stop being a parent, and you know, when you have an older child, an adult, and this is a situation where the person has not come out to anybody but the parent, and they are now going to be turning 30 this year. So they've been living with the secret for a long time, and that's taken a big toll on their mental health, and experiencing some extreme anxiety and depression. And the person is living in the city, so in Dartmouth area, and they are at a point now where they're not able to go to work. They're being very inclusive, not leaving their home. And this parent wants to have a better understanding of how they could go about helping support their child, and what would be a good way to navigate through. So when we're talking about a child who's now an adult and has been living with us for a while, how do we support as parents in that situation?
I guess the first step would be making sure that that person has some resources and connections. You know, Veronica has a lot of connections and does a lot of that work, and depending on where they are, there may be some other ones, but it's hard as a parent to be in the role of like therapist or counselor and kind of give that guidance. So it is really important to help support that person in getting whatever resources they need to process that. Like I mean, depending on the relationship, a parent could ask the questions of what is holding you back or what is making you feel fearful of sharing this, to the point where it's impacting them so much where they can't really partake in community. But there's so many layers to our personal relationships that it may not be the place to have those questions be asked and answer them in a way that is meaningful for that person. So I would say the first step is just definitely making sure that there's some outside resources and supports for that person to navigate that experience that they're having.
Veronica, you're on mute right now. We don't want to miss a word.
Technology. It's an area I've helped others into, and it usually involves me working with both the parents and then the adult in question. And those initial meetings with the adult are usually really, really ginger, and they're scared. They carry a heck of a lot of shame, and just spending time with somebody and them seeing that, you know, I'm not being beaten up and cursed and cussed and miss all of the other things that they're expecting is usually enough to help get them going. And often that's what it is. Years and years and years of it being pent up. They don't know what to do with it. They're scared. And the parents don't know how to help. And they're probably not the right ones to help at that stage. But the thing I can do for them is help explain some of what is probably going on. And 9 times out of 10 is to get them to back off a little bit. Don't be too asking the questions. Don't be trying to get into it too much with them. Don't try and tell them what they should or shouldn't be doing. But giving me that time to go and spend some time with somebody. And it's been, in most cases, it's been successful. It just takes a little while to get over that hump of fear and shame.
Yeah, there's also an organization in Halifax called First Love Yourself, Fly.
Right.
That if this person was in, that could be a nice first step sometimes for people to connect with that organization.
It could be, but Fly mostly do social gatherings, I think.
Yeah, that's true. It's not as much one-on-one, which
you need those initial contacts. You need the one-on-one, and it needs to be done in a very quiet place.
Yes.
Very often I've ended up going out for coffee or tea and just sitting in a car, because that gives them that safe space. They feel they're not being watched by everybody else, and they can start to ask questions. But even then, it can take a long time before they start talking.
Yeah. There's another question in here, again, with an older child, 22-year-old transgender, and looking for resources to help support. And so what I'm kind of hearing for those that are kind of out of the home, they're not, they're adults, right? They're still our children in a way, but they're adults, living lives, that when they are coming out later in life, I'm hearing it's important to connect to perhaps another transgender person that can help build relationship and build acceptance, of themselves, and, help navigate this world a little bit. Would that be kind of the direction?
That's usually the direction I take people through. Once they got comfortable, I connect them with other people in the community, and sometimes those connections just fly when they get going, and I don't see them much after that, and that's okay. That's how it should be. Just getting that get-go. Yeah, they need that one person to help them start.
And that kind of comes back to that peer support, right? For both parents and for youth, that like spending time with people of similar experience, how powerful that can be.
Yeah.
There's some resources on Facebook as well, Trans Family Nova Scotia. There's some parent groups as well. And then again, like any of the local pride groups, Lunenburg Pride is the one that I'm on. And that can be nice too, because, sometimes the separation of screen versus in person can be helpful, to even just be able to like ask a question in a group or a community where or to search the questions that have been asked prior and answered. There's a lot of support on there, just kind of navigating some of that. And then too, with the pandemic has brought the rise of virtual online therapy and support. So if somebody's struggling to, leave the house or going places, that may be a good starting point, is to find gender diverse therapist or an ally therapist who are WPATH trained, who are doing some online support to get it as a starting point.
To be honest, even those outreaches to therapists or groups instills a lot of fear and social anxiety. One of the things that, I put that forward too, and they just don't want to do it. But one of the things I put forward is, well, why don't you create a different Facebook profile, one that's completely different and new. And one of the things I've done here is I've I have a domain that I own a domain name just to give away free email accounts so people can do that. So if they don't want to use the Googles and Hotmails, they want something that's sensitively managed, I have that. So it takes a while for people to do that. And there's, you know, they're not going to go and seek help from a physician or a family doctor or a nurse practitioner or a therapist, because there's still that ingrained fear and shame. It takes that initial hump for some people takes an awful lot to do.
Mhm. Does it help, again, just I'm thinking of these people, and I'm wondering, as a parent, like, does it help just exposing to different, like they may not do it, right, but just knowing that there's other people out there that have had a similar experience, you know, that there's people out there that have, you know, held these secrets and are coming out later in life, and that, does that help at all? Or
To be honest, I found that those folks that are in that position don't want to reach out to too many people, or don't want to be seen by too many people too quickly. So it often has to be done very quietly, very gently. They won't even appear at a pride parade in the crowd on the side of the road because they feel that they're going to be seen and exposed. So it's awful how that gets built up, and it's a very difficult thing to step away from. And you know, I had that in my own experience, having had it shut myself down from a 4-year-old. It took me a long time before I would open up, and that was one of the most difficult things I did. Now somebody else talked about the coming out process and who you talk to and who you don't talk to, and I think you got to the point of letting the children make that steer, but that's one of those big things, right? It doesn't matter what you think as a parent, whether somebody's going to be supportive or not. You've got to take the steer from the child.
And sometimes the people you think aren't going to be supportive are, and sometimes when you aren't. So it's really nothing that can be predicted either.
A lot of surprises.
Yeah, so it is like going back to that piece of that kind of internal intuition too. You know, we as adults may view certain people as being safe people, but we see this all the time where some kids have an aversion to certain people. There's just something about them that they sense or pick up on. So,
yeah,
you know, even if it's your, you know, your aunt or your cousin or somebody that you've had a certain experience with, doesn't mean that that's necessarily the experience of your child. So it is important to ask them and go at their pace. I know for my child, like just that kind of process of sharing with friends, there was kind of the core key friends, and, you know, asking, okay, when do you want to do it? How do you want to do it? Kind of thing. Like, do you want to just meet up, and do you want me to tell them, or do you want to tell them? Like, that's a big thing too, and can be very empowering as well. And that's a question that we asked when my child was starting school, like starting public school for the first time, was, you know, how do you want it shared, and how do you want it shared? And essentially, initially, it was just sharing with the teachers, like with the grownups and the adults. And then, so it wasn't necessarily something that was put out there to the rest of the class, but my child did it on her own. Like, you know, she picked up on a scenario in class that was relatable to the topic, and it came up in a very natural way. And it came up from a child to children. So using the same language that they use, right? So it made sense for them. And it's since come up a couple other times too, where it's like this very innocent, you know, I forgot that you were transgender, or sometimes they term it as, I forgot that you were a boy that they thought you were a boy when you were born. So if those conversations come up with the kids, the school has been great where, you know, they don't just automatically jump in and step in and try and like close off the conversation because of their own discomfort or try to, I guess, rescue my child. They have observed the conversation and kind of witnessed it to make sure that it's happening in a way that's respectful, but they've allowed my child to say what she needs to say, and then they just move on. And you know, in these instances, it is great because even if on the other side, some of these kids have parents that maybe don't know or maybe have certain views or whatever, the kids are experiencing it, they're in it, and they're experiencing it as a very normalized thing within the school. And that's an environment that they're spending a lot of time in. So these kids are growing up in this experience where it's not a big deal and it just is what it is. So fortunately, my child has not experienced a lot of challenges with that. I mean, it's more so been the challenges with the kids in older grades that aren't kind of like in it with my child. So they may not have the same information that the kids in the younger grades do. So there's still some of that learning happening, but yeah, like definitely listen to your kids, involve them in the conversations of making some of these decisions. It's really important.
Thanks so much, both of you, for everything that you've shared with us. I feel like it's just so much the very tip of the iceberg.
It is.
Yes, and I just want to recognize the time. It is 8 o'clock, it's just after 8. So if either of you kind of want to have anything you kind of like to share to close, and then what I'll do is turn the recording off. The two of you are welcome to stay or to sign out, and we'll just open the floor to the participants. And if you want to stay, you're welcome to have a bit of a chat. So is there anything either of you like to say to kind of close up this little section?
I was just, if anybody needs to reach out to me, please do. Don't hold back. That's what I do. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Veronica, for all your generosity in the work that you do.
Yeah, and I mean, same for me as well. People don't necessarily, like, they don't have to be coming to see me as a client in order to get resources and information. I'm just an email away. That's usually the best way to reach me, is by email. You can reach me, you can probably Google me, but BriAnna Simons Therapeutic is my website, and then my email contact is on there. And even if it, like, I've had people from other parts of the province too, just saying like, are you aware of resources? Like, that's probably the biggest thing. I mean, Veronica probably has loads and loads of information, but every person who kind of like works in this realm has different resources. So don't be hesitant to reach out to somebody that isn't necessarily in your town or your local area who's in doing this work, because there's so much information that can be really helpful.
A lot of those resources are just that kind of ingrained knowledge that's you don't necessarily have a list of X, Y, Z, but you just know it and you know where to point people. So yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, just reach out.
Amazing. Thank you both so very much. And I'm going to stop the recording now. And let's see.